Okay, video 3 for week 3, Selfie in Society, and what I want to talk about specifically in this video is the concept of self-representation and self-presentation being critically important in that. And to understand self-presentation, I'm using largely the work of this gentleman above me. This is Erving Goffman, the Canadian sociologist. The presentation of the self is a particular function of the selfie, is what a selfie does. One of the things a selfie does, at least. And self-presentation as an academic concern is definitely most closely concerned with Erving Goffman, who stands above me here. Self-presentation means everything we do to manage the impressions we make on other people. And this is something that we are consciously doing all the time, every day. We are constantly working to manage people's expectations and people's impressions and people's ability to categorize us on a daily basis. We do this through a variety of what we call front stage behaviors. To use a metaphor of a theater, you have the backstage area, which is us, and on the front stage you have this performance that's going on where we are continually dramaturgically mediating our identity in a particular way to get people to understand us in particular ways. Goffman's theory, really, I've just set it out in layman's terms right there. This is what Goffman thinks self-presentation is all about. Self-presentation is a series of acts that we are engaged in throughout our daily lives in order to present ourselves in particular ways. Social media as a stage for this is obviously critically important. Self-presentation is not about overtly strategic performances where we try to fool people and appear as something we're not. Instead, it refers to the acts that emotionally intelligent people do to persuade the interaction partners of their version of the shared situation they are in. And this is something, as intelligent people, we are doing all the time. Selfies act as a form of self-presentation, and selfie practices themselves allow us to be present in order to be presented. And Nick Coldry talks about this, that presencing is the use of media to push our information about ourselves into public circulation, and social media is a platform for doing that, and the selfie is a vehicle for that information about ourselves. And sustaining a public presence in an information saturated world through social media and through our self-presentation strategies is critically important. I have no doubt that many of you will be talking about your self-presentation strategies in your coursework for this module, in which case I do highly recommend that you go much further than what I'm going to do in the next few slides about Goffman and so on, and really get into what Goffman is talking about. In terms of what others have got to say about this, so you've heard me talk about Anthony Giddens before. In Modernity and Self-Identity, Giddens' masterwork from 1991, he outlines a framework for understanding the role of identity in a modern society. Now, for Giddens, social structures and human agency are inextricably connected, and I talk about that, I think, in the very first video, with the former being reproduced by the latter through the repetition of certain human actions. As Giddens says, in the setting of modernity, the altered self has to be explored and constructed as part of a reflexive process of connecting personal and social change. What is he talking about here? Basically, we have to continually perform the self and experience that performance in order to continue to modify ourselves in this modern age. Social media, years after Giddens was constructing this, by the way, but social media is a way in which we do that. So self-identity is therefore a person's own reflexive understanding of their biography, and an ongoing project that we are constantly modifying, updating, safeguarding, and so on, according to Eugenie Ciapera. So for Giddens, the self is consequently tantamount to a kind of project or a work of art. Identity is accordingly seen as a perpetual beta phase, to use new media, and I do like the word beta. We're always beta testing ourselves, never quite complete, instead of always in the process of becoming. You might think, whoa, this is deep. What the hell are you talking about? Let's break it down. Self-identity is always a process. It's never a finished thing. I am never done with my identity, neither are you. We are always constantly building it, modifying it, changing it, and we do this literally through our everyday practices of life. Now, in contemporary life, social media performs a very important role in that continual reflexive understanding of our own biography, our own lives. We are continually reflecting upon our social media presence and making changes to the way we do things on the basis of that reflection. Okay. So a person's identity can thus be found within their capacity to keep a particular narrative going. I really like that phrase because it tells us a lot about the nature of social media and indeed the nature of our visual representations of ourselves. We are continually involved in the process of keeping a particular narrative going, that narrative being us. So this is accomplished through the construction of a biography that details the self in a fashion that makes sense to us as an individual and to those we are pushing it out to. As this is the case, the materials used to construct and present our various identities, as well as the circumstances under which this construction takes place, acquire an increased significance. Our social media platforms are significant in this, and the last point is particularly important in this context, as Christian Fuchs calls this the Facebook age, as social networking services arrive with their own imagined affordances that have implications for identity formation and maintenance going forward. You know, as these platforms mature, we've all done it, right? We look backwards about what we were when we first started using a particular platform and got hugely embarrassed by it, I expect. So social networking sites afford new ways for people to curate, present, and perform who they understand themselves as being. I mean, you know, this is a little bit postmodern, and obviously you would have done MS200, so you understand what I mean by the term postmodern in this context. You know, we are continually in a process of performing ourselves and reflecting upon that performance, and our being itself is continually being made and remade, and our understanding of ourselves is continually refracted through this media lens. So the suggestion here is that identity is itself a performance played out through various platforms, such as social networking. And that echoes Goffman's understanding of the self as explained in his classic text, Presentation of Self in Everyday Life. Because for Goffman, all interactions are performances in which individuals attempt to present themselves in a certain life, just like I'm doing right now, and identity is the outcome of enactments in which the actors provide an impression of themselves. So the outcome of me doing things like this and our interactions in class and what have you is my identity, effectively. And all these, you know, hundreds of interactions that I have on a daily basis, you add them all together, you get me, and you get you, and so on and so forth. This is how Goffman sees identity. When we're thinking about networked self-representation, i.e. selfies, then these have transitioned from early, effortful, static, but under our own control into sort of ways of representing ourselves through social media, like early homepages on MySpace, into dynamic, multi-platform and aggregated, but dependent on a pre-given template, presentations through social media. So we now have self-presentation management strategies on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, etc. All will be different according to the affordances of each platform and who we are connected to on each platform and what our aim is for using each of these on each platform. So images, status updates, but also our friends, their check-ins and other data traces function as our social cues in order to understand other people as well. And the visual aids help us express emotions in textual communication. This makes visuals and not necessarily less usable as self-representations also. So all of our behaviors here and how we interpret others' behaviors in this way are all part of the rich tapestry of how we construct and decode identities. Networked visual objects like GIFs and memes allow us to express ourselves with less effort and more nuance. They're strategically useful forms of communication in themselves also. And again, go into this rich tapestry of how we actually achieve a notion of identity being constructed. So, like any performance, there's always an audience required. So just to quote a long form from Goffman, when an individual plays a part, he implicitly requests his observers to take seriously the impression that is fostered before them. They are asked to believe that the character they see actually possesses the attributes he appears to possess, that the tasks he performs will have the consequences that they are implicitly claimed for it, and that in general matters are what they appear to be. We are asked to put some trust, therefore, into the impressions that people create of themselves on social media. And implicitly, when we are involved ourselves in this self-presentation and impression formation with others, we are asking others to trust the way that we are presenting ourselves too. even though we should all be aware that this is an act. We are playing a role. That's what Goffman's work is really important in telling us, that we should recognize that we are all involved in playing a role. So Goffman, as I said, used these theatrical sort of metaphors. So taking the metaphor of the stage further still, Goffman argued that identity can be readily divided between front and back regions of social interaction, each with its own schema. So schema is like a mental shortcut or a series of mental shortcuts that we use, and corresponding subject positions that we have. Front performances are the part of the performance witnessed by the spectators. When you see me talk, that's a front stage performance. In stark contrast, back regions are the places where performers can relax and step out of character, as Nicole Ellison puts it. Those spaces where action occurs but are related to the performance, but are inconsistent with the appearance fostered by that performance. What is Goffman talking about? I feel like the authentic self is the backstage bit. It's the bit that is us but is not presented to others. It's the bit that only we can know. There's something a little bit problematic about this difference between front stage and backstage, like we're two different people, like we're all Jekyll and Hyde or something like that. It's not quite as clear cut as that as well, because as Goffman said, there's a, what we do in the backstage is always related to the performance. There is a kernel of truth, at very least, with the front region performance and the back region performance, between the real self, if you like, and the performed self. But the performed self might be an exaggeration of that. In terms of how we take this theoretical information and encompass it into this discussion of visual cultures, identity is not passive, right? It is an active thing. Is a continually active process that is the result of various life choices and which manifest themselves in myriad ways. So identity can be interpreted as a performance in which people use any number of front regions to present an idealized version of themselves to others. And in the digital age, one significant stage is played out on social media through our self-representations as selfies. Remember, because we choose how we take the image, what filter, what angle, what text, who it's shared with, and how it's shared. And those factors are all critically important in how our identity is being actively constructed by us as participants on social media through this visual form. So the selfie as an expression and part of identities therefore encompasses both the front and back stages in Goffman's view. The front stage is the performance part, but the backstage is the decision making that we actually went through to make that front stage thing. That gives us a revealing of who we are, if you like. And when we deconstruct people's images that they put online, we are making deconstructive comments to ourselves about what that person actually is. This should also be very, very indicative to us when we consider different platforms, and very important to us when we consider different platforms. The visual self as we present it on Instagram is always going to be different to Facebook, it's going to be different to Twitter, it's going to be different to TikTok, etc. It's going to be different to Snapchat. And just go through all the platforms. For others who use platforms like WeChat, there's always going to be different ways of doing things there too. We have, if you like, different visual constructions of self presentation and self-identity based on the platform we are using. We see this in the meme, right? Many of you have seen the meme, like me on Facebook, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, wherever. And that meme though it may be, it's absolutely true. We are continually involved in a performance of constructing ourselves, not just in order to control or try and exert a sense of control over our own identities and how we are indexed by other people, but we are also corresponding to the norms and conventions of the platform that we are posting on to. And Instagram, as I've mentioned before, has a very strict, I think, being the operative word, set of conventions and norms for what should be posted and archived on that platform, which is very different to Facebook, which is different to Snapchat, which is different to TikTok as an emerged now form of visual self-representation with the TikTok videos. So this kind of nuanced self-presentation, when you're talking about it in your projects, you need to link that back to the platform you're talking about and how you see that platform, how others see that platform, and how it is used in your particular way in order to inform the representation of self you're putting out there. We have one more video for this week, which I will record very shortly. I don't know when you're going to watch it, or if you're going to watch it at all. But kind of like the last one is how not to selfie. It's interesting.